Okay, so once again in this class we're learning about mindfulness, in particular the practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness, sometimes called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And so far we've talked about the first 2, mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of feelings. So today I thought to start with just another practice of meditation on the mindfulness of feelings and talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll start looking at the third of the 4 foundations, which is mindfulness of the mind. So once again, sit in a comfortable position for meditation, but still keeping your back straight. And remember the motivation we generated earlier, the start of the previous meditation session. So take a few moments to remember that, bring that back into your mind and make that your reason, your motivation for participating in this class. And then we'll start with a few minutes of mindfulness of the breathing. Just allow your breath to flow in and out in a natural rhythm. And with your mind, your awareness, pay attention to the breath as it's flowing in and flowing out. Try to stay attentive to each full inhalation and each full exhalation. And anytime you notice your mind has wandered away from the breath to something else, you've lost the breath or forgotten the breath, which means you've lost your mindfulness. Forgetfulness has taken over. But that can be repaired. So we can remember the breath, bring our attention back to the breath. That means we're restoring our mindfulness. So just really try to do that. Notice if your mind is on the breath or has gone elsewhere. And then when you do notice it has gone elsewhere, bring it back to the breath. Remember the breath. And now, while continuing to be aware of your breathing, flowing in and flowing out, see if you can expand your awareness, open up your awareness, so that you can be aware of feelings. Because there are feelings happening every moment, with every experience that we have. Bodily sensations, hearing sounds, maybe smelling odors, maybe tasting something in our mouth, or with thoughts, memories that arise in our mind. So with all of these experiences, there's always a feeling tone, either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So just, again, keeping your mind on your breathing, being aware of your breathing, just see if you can notice any of these three types of feelings as they arise. And just notice the feelings. You can label them, pleasant, unpleasant, and so on. But don't get caught up in analyzing them or thinking about them. Just notice them, let them go, and again, pay attention to your breathing. And the Buddha explained that pleasant feelings can lead to attachment, desire, craving, wanting more of that pleasant experience. Unpleasant feelings can lead to aversion, dislike, wanting to push away that feeling or the object that's causing that feeling. So just see if you can notice that in your own experience. You can notice if a pleasant feeling leads to craving, desire, attachment, an unpleasant feeling to aversion or even anger. So I'd like to share some of what Joseph Goldstein says about mindfulness of feelings in his book, Mindfulness, A Practical Guide to Awakening. So I'll just paraphrase most of this, read some of it. So he suggests that during meditation, we can spend some time focusing on the feeling tone of our moment-to-moment experience and kind of just label the feelings that we notice: pleasant, unpleasant, unpleasant, pleasant, and so on. And he says, try not to do this in a mechanical way, but really try to refine your awareness. Really try to notice the different feelings that arise. And he says that if we do this even for short periods of time, then it helps us see the very transitory nature of feelings, how they are impermanent. So that's one of the things Buddha emphasized in the practice, with all the four foundations of mindfulness, to be able to see the impermanent nature, how these different experiences, our body and feelings and so on, how they don't last. They arise and pass. They're very impermanent. And then he says that when we're not meditating, but at other times in our life, we can use the more obvious reactions of likes and dislikes to become aware of the feelings that lead to those. And for example, he talks about where he lives is New England, the northeast part of the United States, where it's very, very cold in the winter. And he says it's a really good opportunity to notice feelings when you go outside and it's freezing cold and there's strong winds blowing. Then you can easily notice unpleasant feeling. And then if the sun is out and you turn towards the sun and you feel the warmth of the sun on your face, then it's easy to notice the pleasant feeling. And he says, or we might notice the different feelings that arise around meal times. Perhaps the pleasant feeling in smelling or tasting delicious food, or the unpleasant feelings when we overeat. So just in our daily life, try to become aware of, the different feelings that arise, which are very obvious. And then he says, as we become more aware of the transitory nature of feelings, we become less identified with them. So as we recognize how they're very transitory, they come and go, they don't last, then that helps us to not identify with our feelings so much and have less attachment to the pleasant ones and have less aversion to the unpleasant ones. And he says that the Buddha compares feelings to different kinds of winds that blow in the sky. So there's a whole kind of quotation here from the Buddha, from one of the sutras. The Buddha talks about the different kinds of wind. There's strong winds and there's mild winds. There's dusty winds, lots of those in Israel, bringing the dust from the desert and just dumping it all over everything. And sometimes winds are dusty, but sometimes they're free of dust. They're clear. They clear away the dust. Sometimes they're hot, they're cold, and so on. And then the Buddha says, so in this very body here, various kinds of feelings arise. Pleasant ones and painful ones, and those neither pleasant nor unpleasant. When a bhikkhu, meaning a monk or any practitioner, meditator, who is ardent, enthusiastic, does not neglect clear comprehension, it's another term for vigilance or introspective awareness, really paying attention to what's going on, then that wise one fully understands feelings in their entirety. Having fully understood feelings, one is taintless or stainless in this very life. So that's an interesting analogy, that feelings are just like the winds that blow in the sky, and we know that winds come and go. We just had some very strong winds yesterday, last night, but they've died down. Now it's very calm, not windy. So in a similar way, feelings are like winds that blow within us, but they're not permanent. They don't last. And then he talks about how it often happens that we don't recognize that when there is a pleasant feeling, when we have a pleasant feeling, we tend to get attached to the object in relation to which we have that pleasant feeling, when in fact it's the feeling that we're attached to. We're actually attached to that pleasant feeling. That's the thing we want. But we tend to think it's the object that gives us that pleasant feeling, so then we get attached to that object. So that's one aspect of attachment that we can look at and watch, recognize, and realize it's not really the object that we're attached to, but it's the feeling that we have. And likewise with unpleasant feelings, we tend to have aversion to the object, thinking that is what's making me suffer. That's what's causing me to feel so bad. So then we have aversion or even anger towards that object. And we don't recognize that it's actually the unpleasant feeling that we don't like and want to get away from. So as an illustration of this, he relates the story of Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah was a great meditator and also teacher in Thailand. So he spent a lot of time living in the forest in Thailand and meditating. And so there was one time when he was staying by himself on retreat in a little hut in the forest. And there was a village nearby. And one night the villagers were having a celebration and were playing loud music on loudspeakers. So at first, Ajahn Chah became annoyed, thinking, don't they know I'm here on retreat? But after a few minutes of consideration, he realized the problem was in his own mind and not in the sound. He thought, well, they're just having a good time down there. I'm making myself miserable up here. No matter how upset I get, my anger is just making more noise internally. And then he had this insight. Oh, the sound is just the sound. It's me who is going out to annoy it. If I leave the sound alone, it won't annoy me. It's just doing what it has to do. That's what sound does. It makes sound. That's its job. So if I don't go out and bother the sound, it's not going to bother me. So, not easy, I know myself. Very, very difficult when there's something annoying like sound to think the problem is the sound. It's the sound that's disturbing me, the sound that's making me feel unpleasant. And it's not easy to recognize, well, it's just my mind that is reacting in that way to the sound. And so if I change my mind, work on my mind, and see the sound differently, then it won't be a problem. In fact, I did have that experience. When was it? In the springtime. In the springtime, we have a lot of wild turkeys who live in the forest around here. And in the springtime, that's their mating season. And they make a lot of noise. The males go gobble, gobble, gobble. And the females sound like puppies whining. And so they have a place they tend to hang out just below my cabin where I live. And they would go down there in the evening and, and they're making lots and lots of noise until it was dark. I was finding that quite annoying, quite disturbing. I want to meditate. I wish they would shut up. And so I realized, I can't stop them from making noise. That's just the way they are. They can't help it. They don't have any control over their hormones and their bodies and their minds and so on. So I realized I had to change my mind. So I worked on that, worked on my mind, and thought about impermanence. It's impermanent. Soon they're going to go to sleep and be quiet and not make any more noise. And yeah, just thinking different thoughts helped me to stop feeling annoyed about it. But yeah, this is what we tend to do, is see that the object, whether it's a sound or a sight or a taste or a smell or a physical sensation, that is the problem and not the way our mind is reacting to it. So that's a helpful insight to have that can help us to have less attachment and less aversion, realizing that the problem is here in my own mind rather than out there in the object. So here's another quotation from the Buddha talking about how to practice mindfulness of feelings. Whatever feeling one feels, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant, in other words, neutral, one abides contemplating impermanence in those feelings, contemplating fading away, contemplating relinquishment. Contemplating thus, one does not cling to anything in this world. When one does not cling, one is not agitated. When one is not agitated, one personally attains nirvana. So that's sort of the ultimate attainment we can have by practicing mindfulness of feelings, although in the Mahayana tradition our goal is not self-liberation, nirvana, but Buddhahood. But bodhisattvas need to do this practice as well. And then one more thing about feelings before we move on. So at the end of our class last week, there was also an explanation about two kinds of feelings: worldly feelings and then unworldly or spiritual feelings. So worldly feelings are those that are related to our sensory experiences and are involved with the three poisons, with attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And then unworldly feelings are related with our practice, our spiritual practice. So for example, when we meditate on death or we meditate on suffering, dukkha, we might have an unpleasant feeling. But it's important to meditate on those topics. We need to realize that that's how things exist, so that we can become free from suffering and death and so on and so forth. Another example would be having a pleasant feeling when we meditate on loving kindness and compassion, or any of the four immeasurable thoughts, or when we practice generosity, giving to someone who is in need or helping someone who is in need. There's usually a pleasant feeling involved with that. So those are spiritual, pleasant feelings. And so I thought to help you with this, I'll make a little questionnaire that I will send you in an email together with a reading for next week's class, and ask you to make examples of these different types of feelings in your own experience, things you notice in your own experience. Different worldly and unworldly, pleasant, unpleasant, and so on. But keep in mind that all feelings, worldly, unworldly, pleasant, unpleasant, and so on, all feelings are impermanent. And that can help us to not be attached to the pleasant ones or bothered by the unpleasant ones. So ideally, we just practice mindfulness of them, be aware of them, and notice how they arise and pass. Also, the Satipatthana Sutra includes instructions to be mindful of feelings both internally and externally and both internally and externally. So we looked at that with regard to the body and the breathing, for example. And so with regard to feelings, this means that internally means being aware of our own feelings, and then externally is being aware of others' feelings, which you're very much aware of in your work with your patients, and family members and so on. So that's part of the practice as well, is to be aware of the feelings of others. And I think it's also helpful to understand the impermanence of feelings, because then even if someone is sad, crying, obviously going through some painful experiences, if we understand impermanence, we won't be so affected by that ourselves, because otherwise we can easily become sad when somebody else is sad. And of course, it's appropriate to have compassion for this person who's sad, but if we remember how feelings are impermanent, then we won't become overly sad. And instead we can keep our mind clear and then be in a better state of mind to give them help. So ideally, when we are aware of feelings, both our own and others, we respond to them according to the Dharma. I mean, that's somebody following the Buddhist path would have a Dharma response. So, for example, when we see other people experiencing pleasant feelings, looking happy, that we respond with joy, sympathetic joy, one of the four immeasurable thoughts, rather than jealousy, which can happen. But that's one of the afflictive states of mind, a painful state of mind. So we try to train ourselves to feel joyful about other people's happy feelings, pleasant feelings. And when we notice unpleasant feelings of others, then responding with compassion, having compassion for them, rather than aversion, despair, depression, fear, wanting to run away, and so on. So that's probably quite obvious, but it's good to be reminded of it. Yeah, so in short, try to understand that feelings are impermanent and they are also impersonal. They're simply mental states, mental phenomena that arise as a result of various causes and conditions that we don't really have any control over. One of the main conditions is having contact with objects. So then our mind just immediately has a feeling with response to that. And the feelings that we have, whether pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, are also conditioned by our karma, the ripening of karmic seeds from the past. But I think there's also some conditioning from this life. I was thinking about how people tend to like the kind of foods that they grew up with, you know, the kind of foods that they ate as children in their families. Not always, of course. Some people don't like the kind of food their families eat, but some people do. And so that's due to just habit and familiarity with the family and the culture, the society that we grow up in. Just one example of that is Australian people tend to like Vegemite. Maybe not all, but that's something that people eat in Australia. And you grow up eating Vegemite and you like it. Whereas people who are introduced to Vegemite later in their life, they think, oh, this is disgusting. How can you eat this? So I think, yeah, conditioning experiences in this life can also affect the kind of feelings that we have. But again, feelings are changeable. Sometimes we might dislike a certain type of food the first time we eat it, but then we keep eating it and eventually we might come to like it. And then the most important thing about feelings is to understand that they are not who we are. we are not our feelings are not me, and also our feelings are not experienced by a permanent, inherently existing I. There's no real I who is experiencing feelings, although it seems like there is. And also feelings are not the possessions of such an I. They're not owned by such an I. So these are very profound insights to have, but eventually, as one practices more and more, one comes to these insights. Okay, so let's move on to the third of the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of the mind. So in your book, at the bottom of page 44, there's just a couple of paragraphs on this. It starts by saying, in the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition, mindfulness of mind refers to mindfulness of mental states. For example, a mind affected by attachment or hostility, or a mind unaffected by attachment or hostility, and so on. So just to, these aren't in your book, but the words of the sutra, Satipatthana Sutra, the words the Buddha said were, here one knows a lustful mind to be lustful, and a mind without lust to be without lust. One knows an angry mind to be angry, and a mind without anger to be without anger, and so on. And so there's a number of different mental states. We won't go into all of them because some of them are actually things we don't experience, like a liberated mind. So, that's probably not something we have experienced. But anger and lust are things that we've experienced. So we can start with these. And then the Buddha also talks about a deluded mind. One knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. So deluded in the Pali tradition, delusion refers to ignorance, confusion about the truth, nature of things, how things actually exist. For example, impermanence. So thinking that impermanent things are permanent would be an example of delusion. Or thinking there's a self, some kind of permanent self, when in fact there is no such thing. And then he also talks about a contracted mind. One knows a contracted mind to be contracted, and a distracted mind to be distracted. So contracted means, as you can imagine, kind of tense or depressed, withdrawn. And then distracted, we know that very well, when our mind is agitated and running all over the place. So in short, the Buddha in this practice is advising us to recognize when afflictive mental states are present, but also when they're absent, which is interesting. Because by doing this practice, we can see for ourselves the difference in those states of mind. Like, what is my mind like when it's angry? And what is my mind like when it's not angry? So that enables us to see for ourselves the difference between those two states of mind. And hopefully we'll recognize that an angry state of mind is not at all pleasant. And it's actually very painful. And that we want to have less of that state of mind, and we want to have more of a mind that is without anger. Because that is the goal in Buddhism, is to free ourselves from these afflictions, these delusions. And we have to start by recognizing that they are painful, disturbing. They immediately disturb our mind, and then they can lead to further problems in the future. We get totally caught up in them and act them out and so on. So we need to see that for ourselves and then really feel, I want to decrease these states of mind, get rid of these states of mind, and not think, oh, the Buddha said they're bad, and so I should get rid of them. So it works much better when we can see for ourselves that these states of mind are painful and that we want to be free of them. And then the explanation in the book goes on to say, these mental states are a primary consciousness, or a main mind, colored by the mental factors that accompany it. So this is something you've heard before. I think I taught you that semester when we went through the mind and the mental factors, main minds and mental factors. So each moment of mind consists of a main mind, a single main mind, one of the 6 types of consciousness, and it's accompanied by a number of mental factors. So what we're trying to notice is if our main mind, like a mental consciousness, is accompanied by anger or attachment or delusion or one of the afflictions, or it's not. Those afflictions are not there. And then it goes on to say, mindfulness of the mind develops naturally from mindfulness of feelings because, based on the 3 types of feelings, the 3 poisonous mental states arise. So becoming more aware of our feelings, and also what is the result of feelings, seeing how pleasant feeling leads to attachment, unpleasant feeling leads to aversion. So then we become more aware of attachment and aversion, and also delusion. So mindfulness of the mind protects the mind from automatically generating afflictions in response to worldly feelings. So I thought we'll do a little bit of meditation on this. So once again, make yourselves comfortable. Trying to sit with a straight back, but a relaxed body as much as possible. Take a few moments to settle your mind down. Let go of or put aside any thoughts that aren't related to the meditation that we're doing. Now, try to remember a time when you had a lustful mind, as the Buddha mentioned, mind with lust or greed, attachment, craving. remember a time when your mind was without lust, greed, craving. Could be even today, right now, or some other time in the past. Are you able to see differences in those two states of mind? And now, try to remember a time when you had a hostile mind, a mind with hostility or anger or hatred. Now remember a time when your mind was without those feelings, hostility, anger, or hatred. Again, it could be your present state of mind. Your present mind may be free of those feelings. Can you see differences between those states of mind? One with hostility and one free of it. So in Joseph Goldstein's book, he talks about the Western habit of kind of beating oneself up when noticing afflictions in the mind. When noticing, for example, anger or hatred in the mind and thinking, oh, I'm so bad, I'm a terrible person. And so instead of reacting in that way, it's more skillful to just think, anger is in my mind, or there is an angry mind, rather than I am angry and therefore I am bad. And we need to remind ourselves that the nature of anger or any of the afflictions is impermanent, transitory. It's like a cloud going through the sky, not always there. It's not me. Don't identify with it. However, we do still need to recognize the faults or the shortcomings of these afflictive states of mind. How they disturb our mind now, how they lead to more suffering in the future if we don't manage them and deal with them, but let ourselves get caught up in them, and how they are obstacles to spiritual growth and so on. So that's, what we've been going through in the Monday class, the different afflictions and faults of them and antidotes to them and so on. And we also need to recognize the opposite states of mind. Patience and kindness and love. These are opposite to anger. And non-attachment is the opposite to attachment. So these are positive, virtuous, beneficial states of mind. So it's good to recognize that for ourselves, that these are states of mind that feel good. They bring immediate peace and benefit. And also within our life, the way we live our life, our spiritual practice and so on. We can definitely change our minds. And just to share a bit more from Joseph Goldstein's book, he says this practice is helpful also to understand the adventitious nature of defilements. How we're taught in the teachings on Buddha nature that the defilements or afflictions like anger and attachment and so forth, these are adventitious, meaning they are not in the nature of the mind. They're not permanent, fixed parts of our mind, but they can be cleared away. And that's why we can have the potential to become Buddha. We have Buddha nature. So that's something that will become more clear. We'll become more convinced of that by doing this practice. So just read a bit more from Joseph Goldstein's book. The heading of this part is simple but not easy. So he's talking about the clear nature of the mind and how the afflictions are adventitious. He said, this understanding and the explicit instructions in the text suggest a very different attitude for working with unwholesome states than the ones we usually bring to practice. Instead of drowning in the defilements through identification with them or judging them or denying them, the Buddha reminds us to simply be mindful, both when they are present and when they are not, remembering that they are visitors. Although this is very simple, it is not always easy to do. For so many years I would struggle with the difficulties in my practice, thinking I was a bad meditator when different defilements arose, or my mind was wandering a lot. Or at times the self-judgment would get worse, and I would think that I was a hopeless psychological mess. At one particular time when I was struggling with a lot of intense fear, instead of applying the antidotes or the instructions to simply be mindful of it, I found thoughts proliferated wildly. I am such a fearful person. It will take 30 years of therapy to unwind all this conditioning, and so on. We'll probably all do that sometimes. Just beating ourselves up, thinking how hopeless we are, and so on and so forth. It took a while to actually follow the Buddha's instructions and see that the difficult mind states were not in themselves a problem or a mistake. They were simply part of the path, impermanent and selfless, just like everything else. Fear is just a mind state. At this point of understanding, there was a certain kind of joy in becoming aware of the defilements, because I would rather see and explore them than not see them and simply act them out or deny them. Yeah. So when defilements arise, if we're skillful, we can utilize them as part of our practice instead of seeing them as hindrances. Of course, they are described as hindrances, but it's really, they're hindrances when we don't know how to deal with them. We get caught up in them. But they don't have to be hindrances. It all depends on how we work with them. So anyway, that's it for today. We can continue with this next week. And just to let you know, the Dalai Lama is going to be giving 2 talks on the Satipatthana Sutra on the 17th and 18th of December. So it's probably the middle of the night where you are. But you can always watch them afterwards. They're on the website. So you just go to dalailama.com. So quite interested in that, because I think this is the Satipatthana Sutra that's in the Tibetan tradition. So it'll be interesting to see what he says about them. So let's finish there. Make a mental dedication of this time we've spent together, doing meditation, listening, learning, with an altruistic motivation. So may this merit be shared by all sentient beings. May it bring them all peace and happiness, freedom from suffering, and may it help them all reach the genuine peace and happiness of liberation and enlightenment. Okay, thank you.